Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. Here, we talk with farmers and chefs and other thought leaders who shape the way we eat, live, and connect. Because food isn't just food. It's your health, community, environment, and economy, all on your plate. I am your host, Dana DePrima. Today's episode sits right at the intersection of all of that. I'm joined by Sam Sifton, one of the most influential voices in how Americans think about food. Over nearly 25 years at the New York Times, Sam helped to build and shape New York Times cooking. And today, he writes The Morning, a daily briefing read by more than 16 million people. That reach matters, because when someone like Sam talks about food, he's not just talking about recipes. He's shaping habits. He's shaping expectations. And in many ways, he's shaping the culture around what ends up on our plates. In this conversation, we get into something that I think is incredibly important right now. We talk about how much has actually changed in the last 20 to 25 years, how access to ingredients has expanded, how more people know their farmers, at least in certain pockets of the country, and how that shift in proximity from anonymous food to food with a story changes the way we cook, shop, and think. But we also talk about the tension that still exists, the gap between small and mid-sized farms and large-scale systems, the reality of distribution, the role of companies like Cisco in shaping sameness across restaurants, the friction between chefs and farmers trying to work together inside a system that wasn't built for that relationship. And maybe, most importantly, we talk about behavior. How people actually changed the way they eat. Not because they read something or were told something, but because they experienced something different. A better tomato, a better egg, a meal that just felt different. That's where everything starts to shift. If you've ever wondered why some food tastes better, why some systems feel broken, or what it would actually take to reconnect to your food in a real way, this conversation will give you a lot to think about. Let's get into it.
We started cooking a little more than a decade ago, and for sure I was the public face of it for a long time, and I'm really proud of what we built, and I'm proud of who I've handed it off to and how well that team led by Emily Weinstein is doing. And I think that the original kind of DNA of it remains, and the DNA of it means that we will always be connected with the world around us in some way. A kind of founding principle of New York Times cooking, that the recipes that we offer make for delicious food at a table where the world will be discussed, where news and culture will be topics of conversation, and so will the ingredients on the plate and the stories of where those ingredients come from. Here's what I have observed over the course of 25 years of messing around in kitchens as a journalist. Well before I came to the Times, when I started my career writing about food, there was this big disconnect between real food and the food that a lot of people were preparing. It still felt like ingredients were like real food was hard to come by. Supermarkets were sort of like anodyne and commercial. Like you couldn't get lemongrass anywhere, right? Much less, organic chicken thighs, much less organic chicken thighs from someone who raised the birds.
Do you think that that's changed a lot?
Oh, 100%. And it's changed on two separate levels. The first is American supermarkets are much better than they were. They stock a much wider variety of foodstuffs just on the condiment aisle alone, which means more people have access to more diverse ingredients to prepare food. And the other thing that has happened is that some of us, the lucky of us, have access to real food, to food that has been prepared by people whose names you might even know. Like we used to talk about farmers markets as if they were something exotic, and now they're central to a lot of people's lives. And particularly where you are in the Catskills, where I am on Eastern Long Island, like more people than before know a farmer, know a fisherman, know where the raw ingredients that they're going to prepare come from. And that's just terrific. 25 years ago on the east end of Long Island, maybe you could get fresh fish. Most of the vegetables that were grown there were shipped to the city. It wasn't a part of the community. You know, shopping at a IGA in Montauk or Greenport was pretty grim. That's not the case any longer. And in fact, I don't know about Montauk, but in Greenport, there's locally grown produce in the produce department. That's fantastic. And that's been a giant change since I started doing this.
What's interesting about that evolution is that it's not just a story of increased access. It's a shift in proximity. For a long time, food existed at a distance, both physically and psychologically. You could buy ingredients without ever considering their origin, their season, or the hands that brought them there. What's changed isn't just that better ingredients are available. It's that the distance between producer and consumer has, in certain pockets, collapsed. And that collapse changes everything. When you know the farmer, or even just know that there is a farmer, the ingredient stops being anonymous. It carries context, responsibility, and even a kind of narrative weight. And that begins to reshape not just how people cook, but how they think about their food altogether. Not as a static product, but as something alive, relational, and embedded in a much larger system. In the development of recipes, and there's a tremendous amount of diversity there, but it seems like you've managed some sort of shift for people who are looking for recipes. And I love to wave around the no recipes cookbook that you did, that the idea is really, okay, you want a recipe, but let's get you in the kitchen and you've got chicken and, Napa cabbage, and what are you going to do with it? Like, be more nimble. Explain a little
Yeah,
bit about that.
this sentence will sound strange, but we were lucky with the pandemic in a way because it made so many Americans cook so much more than they ever had before. And cooking breeds a kind of confidence. And once you're confident in the kitchen, then you can start riffing. That's when recipes like the no recipe recipes, which are really recipes, it's just advice on how to put stuff together. But I guess what a no recipe is a kind of like chord chart for music, whereas a straight recipe is like the sheet music. It's every single little note. And once you are comfortable with every single note, once you've made a recipe a few times and it's yours, then you can start to riff. And once you're successful riffing, you're more confident yet again. And then you really can attack the chicken and chard question and say, like, what else do I have in the pantry that's going to make this taste delicious? But you're not born with that confidence. I mean, some are, but one is not born with that confidence. It's confidence that develops after you've cooked a lot and feel strong in your skills.
Speaking of the pandemic, I think a lot of farmers were feeling very lucky also at that time in a weird way, sort of looking back on it, that people were really seeking them out, looking for them because there was a supply chain issue. But that cooking at home component is something they really wanted to continue. And
Yeah,
it hasn't continued necessarily at the same level. Obviously, there are more options than cooking at home, when then there were less options.
that's exactly right. I mean, there's a small farm near my house. It's like an honor store. You go in and grab a bunch of stuff and put money in the mailbox thing. And I was there a lot during the pandemic. I'm still there a fair amount, but it's not as much. I think during the pandemic, I was eating like 3 dozen oysters a week from the local oyster guy. I'm not doing that as much any longer, but that's okay. It was a strange time. And I think where I am, again, on Eastern Long Island, the relationship between the farms and the consumers, it got closer during the pandemic, but the fact that we're through it doesn't mean that relationship has gone away. It's altered the direct relationship, but I still see that stuff in the market. Still, it's there at the farmer's market, so I'm going to buy.
I think through all of your work with the food there, you've managed something that's really difficult to do, and that's behavior change. It's particularly challenging to do.
It's a habit, right? We're trying to develop habits, and those habits will stick if we just got to do them enough, right? You're not going to become a runner by taking a jog once a week. You're not going to become a fully addicted cigarette smoker if you only smoke one cigarette a week. Like, you got to commit to the bit. Like, you're going to run 3 times a week, or you're going to smoke your pack of cigarettes, and then you're addicted. It's kind of the same with cooking. It's really easy to not cook, particularly in New York City. You could just go to a great restaurant every night of the week. If you're in a rural area, it's really easy to just buy Hungry Man's or whatever the version of that is in your life and not cook. But if you commit to it and say, hey, I wrote a book about this too, I'm going to cook every Sunday and invite people over, then okay, now you've got a habit. Now you've got a practice, as the Buddhists would say. And that leads to more. That leads you to changing your behavior. And I think that it's not just in cooking, it's also in shopping. I think that once you have tasted a truly delicious sweet potato, you're not going to buy a commodity sweet potato again. You're going to want to go back to the thing that you got. And I think that's true of poultry as well. I think it's true of pork. I think it's true of beef. Like, again and again and again, like high quality stuff. You're like, well, I'm not going back to the cheap stuff. There is one exception to that, which is chicken wings, but that's perhaps for another discussion.
I think that goes with whatever buffalo sauce that is.
Exactly.
What's really being described here isn't just habit formation. It's a recalibration of baseline. Once someone has a repeated experience of food that is more flavorful, more nourishing, more connected to its source, their internal standards quietly shift. And from that point on, it's not about discipline or willpower. It's about mismatch. Commodity food starts to feel flat, not just in taste, but in experience. And that creates a kind of friction that naturally pulls people back toward higher quality sources. In that sense, small and mid-sized farms aren't just supplying better ingredients, they're reshaping preference itself. And preference is powerful because it scales in a way information never does. It moves through memory, through the body, through repetition, until what once felt like an upgrade simply becomes the new normal. I sit at this nexus between consumers and small farmers, and the farmers have to constantly educate, like, okay, well, my chicken, which tastes way better and is more healthy for you, is also more expensive because I can't raise a chicken for $3.99. Those conversations are happening, and I do feel for small farmers having to be that like education department in addition to everything else that they're doing. And I guess I'm curious about the lens through New York Times Cooking of, okay, here's a recipe, but is there that conversation about like select better, find your farmer?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a phrase that I've used, which is best available. Like, if you're going to scale a recipe site, you can't be like, all the chicken recipes must be prepared with chickens who went to Oberlin. That's just not realistic. But you can say, in general, what we're looking for is the best available ingredient. There's a lot of extra education, though, that goes into it because, I've absolutely spoken with people who've gone to the local chicken farmer and purchased a $35 chicken and then found that, geez, it was kind of tough. Like, well, maybe it's not a roaster. You should have stewed that chicken and you'll see how fantastic it is. So I find that like we're doing education too. Best available, but sometimes the best available can't be treated like a commodity ingredient. Not all chickens are the same.
Let's talk a little bit about the restaurant world, which you have also done some hard time in the
Yep,
restaurant world.
absolutely.
We're spending over, close to 60% of our food dollars in restaurants, and that's not going away.
We spend a lot of time in restaurants, and I don't think 60% of the time it's doing what I want it to do 100% of the time, which is to be a cultural experience as much as a feeding one. But you couldn't possibly spend 60% of your food dollars on cultural experiences, right? So you're still going to be getting a slice of pizza for lunch, or you're still going to be getting, take out Chinese from the not very good place over by the train tracks once a month. And okay, I would prefer it if maybe we cut those experiences down a little bit and cooked at home. But I love being able to go to a restaurant where something cool is happening and where the experience is wrapped up in the deliciousness of the food, but also of the scene, the place. And when something like that happens, I'm perfectly okay paying my hard-earned American dollars to experience it. And I think we all should be.
When you talk about cultural experience, what do you mean?
What I mean by that is it's not simply going in and sitting down at a table and exchanging money for sustenance. The restaurant may be telling a story, the story of a place, the story of a cuisine, the story of an ingredient in a way that opens diners' eyes and opens their kind of hearts to a new thing or a familiar thing. And I love it when that happens. There's a certain kind of like honesty to it that is not artificial and is cultural.
I think a lot about the restaurant industry and its potential to really connect. And like you're saying, with certain stories that chefs will have about where they are and who they're sourcing from and why this is so delicious because this sweet potato is,
Yeah.
central to this dish that's not even a sweet potato dish, but it's central and it's part of this, what I've been working on with this farmer.
I love it when that happens. Unfortunately, it became a little performative at one point where like every farmer is credited with each part, and it was just like, what are you actually doing here? But when a restaurant is doing what you just pointed out, which is to say, listen, I found an amazing thing that an amazing farmer does, grow sweet potatoes, culture butter, have like these particular greens that are grown in the middle of the winter under in a hoop barn. And I'm going to highlight them in such a way that allows you, the consumer, the restaurant goer, to experience the magic that just happened that has nothing to do with the chef. That's so cool to me. This mushroom is unlike any other mushroom. This butter tastes different. It's just so neat to see because it highlights the relationship between the chef and the producer, the chef and the farmer, and then makes that relationship part of the diner's experience. How lucky are we to be able to do that?
I guess when I look at that too, like the farmers I know who have chefs trolling their farm stands, for example, looking for inspiration, looking for a new flavor. I think, you're a chef, you're using my produce. Now other chefs are going to find out about it, and these ecosystems start to develop. Like, what can happen when there's that little spark?
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff can happen. And sometimes it doesn't work. I remember I was eating in a restaurant in Maine and I had this celery soup. And I was like, this is the most extraordinary celery soup. I was just, what's the secret to this celery soup? And she said, the celery. And celery is like the blandest thing. I took a bite of this celery stalk, and I was like, well, it tastes just like the soup. It's amazing. And everybody, I was excited, she's excited, I'm sure the farmer was excited, until the farmer was like, you know what? The problem with celery is that's a lot of water. And in fact, like you can jack up the price of that celery to match the water bill to a point. But when we're at $20 for a thing of celery, like that's a problem for the farmer and it's a problem for the chef and ultimately a problem for the consumer, which I don't know. Sometimes I think that's okay too. Like sometimes the magic is fleeting and the guy will turn around and, grow carrots that are just as amazingly delicious as his celery without taking so much water out of his well.
What's being revealed in these moments isn't just a collaboration. It's the emergence of a feedback-driven ecosystem where creativity is no longer isolated to the kitchen. When chefs begin sourcing directly from small and mid-sized farmers, they're not just selecting ingredients. They're entering into a living dialogue with the land itself. The variability, the limitations, even the occasional friction, like pricing, seasonality, or yield, become part of the creative process rather than obstacles to it. And that changes the role of everyone involved. The farmer is no longer just a supplier, but a co-creator. The chef becomes less of a controller and more of a translator. And the diner, whether they realize it or not, is participating in something far more dynamic than a static meal. What emerges from that is not just better food, but a system that is constantly adapting, refining, and, at its best, telling a story that couldn't exist within a standardized supply chain. I've been hearing a lot about, well, I know Cisco just took over the other half of the walk-in restaurant supplier business. And when you talk about systems, and we have, Cisco out there for restaurants in particular, I get it. It's easy. I just need this. I need this.
Yeah, and it comes on the Cisco truck. But the problem is, if it comes on the Cisco truck, it sucks. It's the same every time. It's not going to increase in quality. It's always going to be the same. And that sameness is going to be mediocre at best, right? I spend a lot of time in Maine. I have family in Maine. Maine has some of the most delicious produce, seafood, meats available. But if you eat in a restaurant in rural Maine, at a diner, say, it's going to be all from Cisco. The system there is broken. This is even true at your iconic seafood shacks, where the lobster may have been harvested right there, but it is processed in Portland. So a truck takes it 200 miles away, processes it, brings it back. We're at 400 miles now. And then, crappy fake butter or real butter that's just not very good on a commercial hot dog bun with lettuce that came from the Central Valley of California. Like that's, to me, is just insane.
Right. So we've got these local systems that are available to us, and yet we have this bigger industrialized system that sort of co-ops things, takes
Yeah.
them away, brings them back, mixes them up with other things. We were talking earlier about like behavior shifts, right? This is a lot of behavior shifting that needs to happen in order to, for example, to have a restaurant go like, well, I don't really want my food to taste exactly like the restaurant next door or the
No,
one down
exactly.
the street or the one, 45 minutes from here. I want my restaurant to be unique.
Yeah. I mean, this certainly doesn't scale, but I think it would be cool to see. I wish there were more food trucks at farmers markets. I wish there were more food trucks at farms. I wish there were more food trucks where people are able to buy good ingredients. And then all you got to do is blow people's minds, and then they can kind of change their behavior. I've been doing this a long time, but I distinctly remember, again in the state of Maine, going to the farmer's market, got a dozen eggs. My brother had some venison breakfast sausage, and we bought an amazing loaf of bread. I had one egg fried with one patty of the venison sausage and a single slice of sourdough toast with butter on it. I was like, that was the best breakfast. I mean, it was just perfect. It filled me up. I was full of energy. I was great. It was a perfect breakfast, and a breakfast that I wanted to repeat for the whole time I was visiting family. And you think about that: one egg, one small serving of sausage, one slice of sourdough bread. And compare that to what you get in a diner, where it's like 3 over easy, hash browns, 3 sausage links, and terrible toast, but 2 slices of it. And the behavior change is realizing that when the food is real and when the food is delicious, you don't need as much of it. So actually, over time, the cost comes down. I don't need to buy a gigantic ribeye to serve my family if a small ribeye from a better farm with better flavor and more marbling and more fat on it is as good as it is, because people don't need to portion up like a Cisco eater. That deliciousness leads to behavior change.
And empty food really does make you feel a little on the empty side.
Yeah, you just feel gross. And then next up, you're ordering a large Diet Mountain Dew. Like, it's just not a good way to live.
What's really being exposed here is how deeply standardization has shaped not just supply chains, but expectation itself. When restaurants rely on systems that prioritize consistency above all else, what they're actually delivering is predictability disguised as quality. And over time, that predictability flattens the entire experience: flavor, texture, even the emotional response to eating. The tragedy isn't just that better ingredients exist nearby and aren't being used. It's that the system is designed in a way that makes deviation feel risky, inefficient, or even unnecessary. So what needs to shift isn't just operational, it's perceptual. It's the moment a chef or a diner realizes that sameness isn't neutral, it's a compromise. And once that awareness sets in, it becomes much harder to accept a model that prioritizes ease over aliveness, especially when the alternative, however less convenient, offers something that actually feels distinct, grounded, and real. When you look in your special Sam Sifton crystal ball, what do you see? Where do you see us heading?
Well, I don't know. I think I'm kind of congenitally an optimist. I just said a lot of bad words about Cisco, and I won't take them back. But I will point out that, you know, Walmart's the biggest purveyor of organic food in the nation. Real organic food is on the upswing in the industrial food complex, right? Like, that's good to see. I think that there is a desire for deliciousness in people's lives, and that deliciousness is going to come first and foremost from small and mid-sized farmers. That's good. Can it scale? Small and mid-size is never going to scale to industrial. Look, we talked about the pandemic before. A lot of people left urban areas to move to rural ones where they discovered they could work from home. A lot of people come back to the office, but there are a lot of people who are like, I'm going to stay here in Jeffersonville and run my business from afar. And sometimes it's going to be tough because the Stop and Shop's terrible, but then bam, you're in the summer and things are blooming and farms are working and your eating has changed. So I don't know. I would like to think that we eat better every year. And then I drive through a town where, there's the Family Dollar, and I think, no, we're not. We're just eating canned Dinty Moore again. Because the kind of inequality in this country disproportionately brings shitty food into the diets of the people on the lower end of the spectrum. And we got to do a lot to change that. But for wealthy folks with a regular paycheck, like, it just gets better and better. That's depressing.
It is. Although I will tell you that Nielsen data shows that people on SNAP have a healthier skew than people who are not.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm glad that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes against some of the headline rhetoric that you hear
Yeah.
whizzing around. As a mincer of words, a person who uses words carefully, obviously you were talking about organic, and even the industrial complex of organic is on the rise, and that's a shift over where we've been. And regenerative is now
Yep.
the hot buzzword on the table. And, this sort of bridges a number of things we've been talking about, but it's not perfectly defined at the moment. If I'm talking to a farmer at the farmer's market and they're talking about their regenerative practices, it becomes very clear.
You're right. This is to the benefit of small and mid-sized farms because they're not going to scale. Labels mean a lot less. If you're a small farmer, you can grow delicious stuff and it's basically organic, but you're not going to get that sticker for your basket of green beans. That's okay. That's okay. What we want, first and foremost, it sounds simple, it's not simple, but what we want is a relationship between the person who grew it and the person who's eating it. And we want that person who's growing it to make it delicious. And we want the person who's cooking it to be aware of that and to be appreciative of that and willing to pay for the privilege of cooking it. That's a good outcome. Nobody said anything about, organics or regenerative practices. It's just like, are we all being honest brokers here?
Right. And I think this just goes a little bit to what you were saying about Walmart, Costco or Walmart. Sometimes I want to think bad thoughts about them because they're so big and they have so
Yep.
much power in the food space. But like you said, they're tops in volume in terms of sharing organic vegetables. I spoke with a quail farmer who has an incredible farm in South Carolina, and Costco waited 2 years for her to build them a barn. And she's got best of the best practices and have very, very high standards that she won't let go of, and Costco really appreciates. So when the big industrial complex says, even though we don't have standards for regenerative at this time, like McDonald's is supporting, it's very small, but $200 million regenerative farms for their beef. It's a good sign, but the words are still not necessarily meaning a whole lot. So there's
No,
some argument
that's
over they're co-opting it, but there are signs. It's just sort of a conversation I think that spins around in the regenerative space.
well, Cisco ain't going to be taking part in that conversation, right? That's the danger, is when the big food industrial complex doesn't default to the delicious, but defaults to the bottom line. It benefits Costco to sell great quail. It doesn't necessarily benefit Cisco to do that. What's interesting about this conversation is we've been, I think, largely pretty optimistic and sunny about the state of the world. And that's because of the subject matter that you are exploring, right? That small and mid-sized farms do an amazing thing for us culturally and in our kitchens and in our lives. And we should work hard to make sure that those relationships between us and them flourish. And that leaves me feeling pretty good. But one thing that's tough is that this is a huge country. And I talked about people moving out of cities during the pandemic. Great. Those were all upper middle class folks going to do their cool remote jobs. The fact of the matter is, people are leaving rural America to move to cities. And so that means it's harder and harder currently to have a relationship where most of the food that you eat is coming from less than 50 miles away or 100 miles away. And I'm nervous about that. I think it can't simply be a privilege of the well-to-do to eat that way. We need to figure out ways to feed our cities with great food that comes from pretty close. And that's going to require a shift, I guess, towards small and mid-sized farms. Now I'm getting optimistic again, a shift towards small and mid-sized farms. And we just got to get young people to want to do that work and then to go out and do it and hope that they can figure out a way to get it into town without driving big, heavy trucks belching exhaust into the air.
I am a true believer that we need for many, many reasons, local and regional food networks. We need it for national security. We
Yep.
need it because the politics you may write about, what's happening on a daily basis, is tragically impacted by the fact that our rural towns are emptying out. And when we lose a farmer in one of those rural towns, we're not just losing food. We're losing the infrastructure in that town. We're losing the kids that go to high school. It goes from, 60 kids to 3 in the graduating class. The mechanics don't have jobs anymore. The feed mill closes down, right? When I look at small farmers, I have a very broad lens. That community component is really critical. And it's tough to put two optimists in the room because we're going to look at the possibilities and the sunny side. I spent this past week diving into the most depressing details of all of the programs that were cut. They were all systems creating, market creating programs. And we replaced them with checks to commodity farmers.
Yeah.
And it's not even enough, right? There's a $44 billion loss and a $12 billion series of checks written to big farmers, and small farmers are left out. So when we want our chefs to create something with that spectacular sweet potato, or, we want our lemongrass and we want to be able to get it from an organic farm, they're disappearing. We're losing so many of them. I don't think it has to be the case. So again, I come back to that same optimistic spot. I love hearing that we're doing better. Our grocery stores are better, because they don't always feel better to me.
I'll leave you with that better thing. Yes, two optimists in the room. We're going to end on an optimistic note. That sense that I get in the market, in the commodity supermarket, that things are better. I see when, for instance, there are local greens that are being sold in the IGA, when I know that the clams in the back of the place came from right there. That's really exciting to me. And I think it takes time, takes good recipes, takes good ambassadors like yourself. And I hope I can join you. But it works. It's just chipping things away. If you think back to how Americans ate in 1953, we've come a long way. And, 2053, I hope it's going to be significantly different than it is right now.
Thanks for listening to One Bite is Everything. What I love about this conversation with Sam is that it holds two truths at the same time. We've made real progress, and at the exact same time, the system is still pulling us toward convenience and sameness. That tension is where we're all living right now. The closer you get to your food, the more everything changes. Your taste changes, your expectations change, your habits change. And once that happens, it's very hard to go back. That's the idea behind everything I'm building. Through the For Farmers movement that shows up as real support for small and mid-sized farms, and through my writing on Substack, as a part of Bite Sized, it shows up as a deeper look at what's actually happening behind the food we see every day. So if this episode made you think differently about your food, that's the place to go next, Bite Sized. Because understanding your food is the first step to changing it. If you enjoyed this episode, take a second to rate and review One Bite is Everything. It helps more people like you find these conversations. I'm your host, Dana DePrima, and I'll see you back here again next week. Until then, eat like it matters, because it does.